As US elections are about to start, a complex web of geopolitical interests are unraveling, especially in Russia. The Kremlin is watching closely for any potential shifts in US foreign policy that could either bolster or undermine its ambitions, with candidates Donald Trump and Kamala Harris representing divergent paths. Russian leaders are weighing up who might best serve their interests. The election's outcome is poised to influence not only the US-Russia relations, but also the dynamics within NATO and Europe, as allies assess how American choices will impact political and economic landscapes across the world. All this and more here on Think Tank, so stay tuned.
What I call an opportunity economy.
We will make America great.
We're ready to fight for it. As one people, we are moving forward.
We will make America safe again.
As US elections strongly approach, the contrasting visions of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris for Ukraine's future are increasingly critical, and the outcome could reshape US support. The New York Times has reported that Trump advocates for a swift deal to end the war, raising concerns about potential reductions in military aid, while his views on Ukraine have sparked fears of a compromised position. Conversely, Harris seeks to strengthen NATO and bolster military assistance. President Zelensky acknowledges the risk of weakened support, emphasizing the dire consequences for Ukraine if US aid diminishes. To navigate this political landscape, Ukrainian officials aim to appeal to both candidates, highlighting Ukraine's vast mineral wealth, which is seen as a strategic interest for the US. Ukraine's fate hangs on the balance as voters prepare to decide. Regardless of who wins the US presidential elections on November 5th, President Biden should take the crucial step of redefining America's war aims in Ukraine. Foreign Affairs magazine had reported that a Kamala Harris presidency would benefit from Biden shifting away from unattainable goals, allowing her to implement a necessary but controversial strategic change without facing immediate backlash. Should Trump win, Biden can still influence future policy by advocating for a reasonable diplomatic resettlement while ensuring long-term military support for Ukraine. This approach would protect Kyiv's interests against a potentially less supportive Trump administration. If Trump were to reject this balanced strategy, the blame for any negative outcomes would undoubtedly fall on him. Now we move to the inauguration of the 12th Urban Forum in Cairo by Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi.
Of life of millions of inhabitants and people, despite all the challenges that the cities faces this year, as for the rapid increase in population and the change in the climate and the scarcity of water, the sustainable development and also the losing of houses, and to provide enough funding, which needs a collective efforts, international efforts, to find a creative solutions and effective solutions to face such challenges. Dear guests, this session of the forum comes at a critical time where the world is facing a lot of international crises and wars that has its repercussions and destruction on the cities, effects on the cities and housing places and all the life aspects. This necessitates that we should mobilize all the efforts and the political will to implement peace and to stop all the conflicts in this world, and also to intensify all the efforts for the development and the reconstruction and the building. We cannot do this, we cannot start this with all these serious efforts to face such urban challenges in communities that face conflict and war and killing, displacement, famine and disease. The Middle East is witnessing a lot of conflicts, especially the war that is taking place now in Gaza Strip and Lebanon is a good example and witness of the losses, the great losses that the countries face, and this the voice of the conflict is on the expense of peaceful settlements. The daily suffering of the people of these nations needs an immediate response to stop the bloodshed and the destruction and to start reconstructing and development. Egypt is always keen to offer all the support to its brotherly countries and to stop violence and to stop all the economic and social risks. Ladies and gentlemen, with all the crisis that is around us or facing us, Egypt has achieved a lot during the past years in the field of urbanization and the urban development that serves the local strategies in the 2030 agenda. A lot of initiatives and projects have been implemented, on top of which Haya Karima, the decent life, to renovate the rural areas, and Takaful and Karama initiative to support the poor communities and those who need it, and to provide houses for all Egyptians. These are considered the big housing projects for the limited income people in Egypt and for the whole world. Egypt also has started a new generation of cities with the smart and urban development aspects, on top of which is the administrative capital, Alamein city, among 22 cities that were constructed in different governorates of Egypt, and also launching new projects for the renovation of slums and for the unplanned cities and unsecured places, and to improve the means of transportation. Allow me in this event to announce the launching of the Smart City Strategy and the National Strategy for Better Urban Cities that intensifies the local activities, efforts in the field of urbanization that follow the standards of the international standards. Dear guests, this World Urban Forum represents a very identical and perfect forum for exchanging on dialogue with all the stakeholders about how to improve these cities and the human settlements and to intensify the urban development. This needs the active participation of all stakeholders, of the local communities and international communities, private sectors, the NGOs or civil societies, universities, to have more partnership and to draft more policies that reflect the aspirations of these people to live in better life. Before I conclude my word today, I'd like to express that I hope for this forum to be an important step towards the implementation of the urban agenda and to intensify and to support the international cooperation that would result in solutions facing the urban challenges and to achieve the sustainable development. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the success in the deliberations in this forum. Thank you very much.
That was a part of the president's speech where at the 12th edition of the World Urban Forum, where he discussed that the world is facing a critical time, specifically when it comes to urban development, given the many wars taking place. And he spoke about the need to face urban challenges with places feeling at war, and the places at war, specifically in the Middle East, talked about the redevelopment and reconstruction of these areas and to end the violence in order to reach the urbanization goals as well. And now we get back to the topic of think tank, which is US elections and its implications on the Ukraine-Russia war. To help us explore the global implications of the elections, we're now joined by Paolo Mauri, a military expert from Rome, and Tobias Belgrano, an international relations researcher from Buenos Aires. Welcome both to our program.
Good evening, thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Let me start off with Mr. Mauri. What are Russia's primary interests when it comes to the upcoming US elections? Do they favor a certain candidate, and do they believe if one of them wins or the other, that it could possibly affect their interests within the Europe?
I think that Moscow is looking at this U.S. election with a certain degree of interest because both candidates does not see as in the same way the support of Ukraine. First of all, in one side we have Kamala Harris that she told that she will continue in the Biden's line. So the support of Ukrainian forces will continue with money, will continue with the weapons, will continue with the missiles and whatever. In the other side, we have Donald Trump that has not a clear line toward the Ukrainian war. First of all, he said that he wasn't for to continue the military support of Ukrainian forces. Then he moderate a little bit this point of view since when he spoke with President Zelensky. After that meeting, the thing that we just know is that they agreed to, in a kind of way, to continue the U.S. support. But first of all, it's my opinion that the most weight of military support in case clearly of Trump of the winning on Donald Trump, it would be under the NATO's European allies. So I guess that U.S. will in some way push the European allies to continue this military aid and to focus primarily on the Far East, primarily clearly with about the same China and Taiwan and the South China Sea.
Okay, if we could move to Mr. Belgrano and get his opinion as well. How can the US election results affect American relations with European allies? Specifically, as Mr. Mauri had spoken about, Donald Trump himself seems to be more of an isolationist and is willing to pull out of things like NATO and, pull out of Europe in general. Do you think this could possibly affect relations with European allies?
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, of course. I believe that a victory of Donald Trump could affect and generate more tensions between the U.S. and its allies. We have to dig over in the past when in the previous presidency of Donald Trump, where tensions, especially with Germany, for claims for former U.S. President Donald Trump for its security and for the payments of its security, would generate further tensions with the European allies. Also, and furthermore, Donald Trump, as my colleague clearly stated, has already affirmed that there's an intention of moving forward with a peace talk with Russia, especially promoted by his VP candidate J.D. Vance. So yeah, I would argue to say that it's probable that tensions will arise with the U.S. allies in Europe, and if Donald Trump is elected. If Kamala Harris is elected, I think as my colleague was also correctly saying, there will be a line of continuance of the current administration's actions in Europe of moving forward with more support for for Ukraine. However, I would not underestimate the internal and domestic lack of interest that U.S. citizens are having on keeping participating in foreign wars when the domestic agenda is struggling inside, and especially on
So,
the
sir, do you think that
domestic.
they may possibly, even if Harris wins, they may cut back slightly when it comes to aid?
I think there will be a little setbacks slightly, but not as concrete as if Donald Trump is elected.
Okay, Mr. Mowry, how might the outcome of the elections influence the future when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war and U.S. military support in general for Ukraine? Because obviously both parties are very interested and very invested in who wins this election.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
The question was, like, how will the election results itself, whether Harris wins or Trump wins, influence how the Ukraine-Russia war is handled and how the U.S. military supports Ukraine? Do you think it is going to affect the outcome of what's happening right now there?
Well, yes. First, let me precise one thing. The U.S. foreign policy for the main questions have a kind of fil rouge between Republicans and Democrats. Not so different point of view when it comes to think about Russia, think about China, think about Iran and whatever. But there are slightly differences. In this case, I think that in case of the winning of Donald Trump, he will try to freeze the conflict, and he will try to speak in some way with the Kremlin. So that's why Moscow looks with very interest at these elections. If Kamala will win, I don't think that there will be a major setback of the military aids from the U.S. I think that even Kamala, even Democrats will push the NATO allies to be more proactive in the military sustainment of Ukraine. But let me clear more. This will be in any cases one thing that both the candidates will have to do because of the internal struggle. Because we have seen an America that is divided internally. So they will primarily try to address this main question and then the Russian dossier. But let's remember that the main dossier for Democrats and Republicans, it remains China.
Okay, before we continue talking about this topic, let's first take a look at this report about the potential outcomes of a Trump or Harris presidency. So stay with us.
Among the major challenges awaiting the next American president will be handling relations with Russia, especially given its ongoing war with Ukraine. Experts believe that Harris's policy toward Russia would likely follow the same path as Biden's, given that U.S. aid to Kiev has already exceeded billions of dollars, alongside continued political and diplomatic support and NATO's leadership in confronting Russia.
If Donald Trump were president, Vladimir Putin will be sitting in Kyiv.
Trump, on the other hand, has repeatedly stated he could end the war in Ukraine within days or hours. Experts see that Trump would not only aim to end the war, but also likely work on significantly reduce American support for NATO.
Many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are dying. These cities are being obliterated. And basically they say, what's your stance? Are you for Russia or are you for... I'm for one thing very simple. I want to stop people from getting killed, and I'll have it stopped.
On the Russian side, President Vladimir Putin recently stated that the future of U.S.-Russia relations following the U.S. presidential election will depend on Washington's approach.
Если Соединенные Штаты открыты к строительству нормальных отношений с Россией, то и мы будем делать то же самое. Не хотят, не надо.
Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, who currently serves as deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, recently stated that the results of the U.S. election will not change anything for Russia. He also stressed that the positions of both candidates reflect a consensus between the two parties, Democrats and Republicans, on the necessity of defeating Russia.
Welcome back. We're still on with Mr. Paulo Mauri as well as Mr. Tobias Belgrano. Thank you both for waiting with us. Let me start off again with Mr. Belgrano. What impact could a Trump or Harris victory actually have on NATO, specifically on the idea of funding or expansion? Because I know both have very different views when it comes to NATO.
Well, as we said before, I think we should check on the previous administration of Donald Trump and how he related with NATO, claiming the need of security funds, that U.S. should not pay for security funds in Europe. I would be a little careful in thinking that the Republicans and Democrats are slightly different. In this case, we're seeing the rise of Donald Trump promising to wipe out the establishment of Washington, D.C., and moving with a more radical agenda. So I would think it would be a great difference if Trump is reelected once again, especially in the relations with in relations with alliances like NATO. And that would impact necessarily on Russia's conflict. I think Trump this time it will be a little more radical than the previous time, and this might change the entire approach to Europe. And what I was saying regarding Kamala Harris and her relationship with NATO and Europe, I think that she would move forward with Biden's agenda, but internal and domestically, Americans are fed up with going to foreign wars, and I think that would be an internal pressure that could affect European relations in Harris administration.
Okay, Mr. Mauri, does Moscow favor a specific candidate, or is it prioritizing long-term strategies independent of results, regardless of who wins, whether Trump or Harris?
Well, yeah, I don't think that Moscow literally prioritize one candidate or another one. But I think that the Kremlin will look at in a certain kind of way if Donald Trump really will put on all the things that he said during this electoral campaign. But let me just say one thing. We, as already mentioned, we already had a Trump administration, and what Trump did versus Russia. First of all, Trump augmented the military presence, the U.S. military presence in Europe. He sent more troops in Europe. Secondly, it was the Trump administration was the first one to send ATGM anti-tank guided missile to Ukraine. So we have to face the history before trying to say what will come in future. So it's for that I don't think that we will see a major switch, but certainly Moscow will see Donald Trump like someone you can speak with more than Kamala Harris.
Okay. Mr. Belgrano, how could economic relations between the US and Europe shift based on the election results? Because one candidate is quite a bit of an isolationist, where he believes in, America first and American made and all of that. While Harris also believes in tariffs and all of that, but not necessarily with Europe. Do you think that it could affect economic relations?
It's moving forward with a more isolationist and protectionist agenda. This will affect in foreign investments in Europe and the possibility of European companies of exporting their products to the U.S. and to the U.S. consumers. So I do believe that a Trump presidency would affect the economic relations between Europe and the United States. And especially if we'd also move forward with an economic war once again with China from the U.S. if Trump is elected. So we'll probably see how also European countries that are connected with China will be affected in this sense.
Okay, I'm sorry I have to cut you off there, but we're sort of out of time for this episode. Thank you so much both. That was Paulo Mauri, a military expert joining us from Rome, and Tobias Belgrano, an international relations researcher joining us from Buenos Aires. And as the elections approach, the world holds its breath, anticipating how American choices will reshape global dynamics and power. Thank you so much for watching, and that brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed for real-time updates. Connect with us on the UMS digital platform. Watch it. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.